To improve as a nutrition coach, you need to be able to produce results. But for many reasons, not all of which are your fault. Usually all it takes though is a little bit of troubleshooting and a whole lot of patience, and you can get things back on track. Which is why today I'm going to go over 3 difficult client scenarios with you, with a bunch of helpful lessons and pointers along the way. The third scenario is a bit of a head scratcher, so make sure you hang around for that. Let's start with scenario number 1. Last week I did a live office hours on my YouTube and I got the following question. One client of mine tells me that she has a caloric intake of 800 consistently, but at 70 kilos of body weight, she is still not losing weight. I don't want to assume that she is lying about her intake, or maybe she's just not good enough at tracking, which is obviously fine. But I am afraid of telling her to reduce her calories even more. Activity went up as well, but she is still not losing weight, although she definitely still has around 30% body fat. Okay, here's the deal. This is a very common scenario. It happens all the time. This is a scenario I've seen time and time again, especially when I'm doing assessments with new clients. They report to me that they're eating a level of food that's really low. It doesn't make sense given their goals and where they're at body fat wise. So we need to put our detective hat on a little bit here and figure out what's going on. Obviously this client is already working with the coach, so they have some supervision, they've been given some guidance, but still things don't completely make sense. So here's how I would navigate this scenario, and it typically starts with a conversation, something along the lines of, hey, we've been at this for a little while now, and based on what you're eating, I would assume you would have lost some weight by now, or at least things will be progressing a little bit quicker. Based on that and the fact that your calories are already pretty low, so low that I would assume that you would be making faster progress, is there anything that we're missing here? If you could go over your food log and think about, have I been tracking all of the things that contain calories, like liquids, like sauces, like cooking oils, things that could be missed? And have I been completely honest with all the nibbles and untrackable food that I could be eating? And this is where we want to navigate things carefully, because we just want to assume that they're missing things or they're doing a bad job, but we want to bring up the human aspect of this. You could even bring up what happens in your own tracking. Based on my experience, I know when I'm in a fat loss phase, there are things that I miss. For example, when I use cooking oil, I'm not all that accurate with it, and sometimes I forget it altogether. You think you could be doing something like that? When it comes to a scenario like this, chances are the simplest answer is typically the correct one, which is this client isn't consistently eating 800 calories per day. But I still understand the hesitation around not wanting to go lower, because even if there is some underreporting going on, she's still eating a pretty low level of calories and you don't want to slash it even further. But instead of just assuming that she's metabolically compromised and that there's some dysfunction going on, I'd rather use this troubleshoot method week to week to get a better sense of what are some of the things that could be causing this discrepancy between the calories that she's reporting consuming and the lack of results, so we can get to the bottom of things and get things moving on the right track. Chances are this client is actually consuming closer to 1,200 to 1,300 calories most days, and then there's probably an off day in there that's even higher yet. We want to identify what these things could be and then remain patient. And then from there, if things still aren't moving in the right direction, I'd get even closer to the process. Start to go through their food log on a day-by-day basis and start to make some comparisons and point out where things could be going wrong, where things could be problematic. For example, last Tuesday, you reported that you ate 750 calories. That is quite low and quite lower than the targets that I provided for you. If you could think back on that day, you tell me a little bit more about your hunger. Can you tell me a little bit more about your fullness? Did you feel hungry eating that little amount of food? Because chances are, if your client is actually truthfully eating that amount of food, they're gonna feel quite hungry. If they consistently are that low and hunger isn't an issue, chances are their actual calorie intake, which can be different than what the theoretical amount is usually quite higher. What most coaches will want to do when they see these quite low numbers is put their client on a reverse diet and start adding food back in, which it can be unfortunate if a client comes to you to lose weight and they gain more weight than they would need to and don't really get that metabolic recovery effect of a reverse diet. It's not a good look on you, so I'd rather you just be patient and slowly go through this process of troubleshooting, come up with some potential solutions and get things moving in the right direction. And lastly, remember to coach the person in front of you. If this person is saying, I'm eating 800, 1,200 calories and I'm not hungry at all, I feel stuffed, my performance is good, we're gonna put on our detective hat and assume that even though that 800 calories may not be quote unquote true. It may be enough for them after doing our due diligence, and it's something that we can work with and slowly raise over time. Then as a coach, you can take comfort in knowing that you've added food in, you've added more energy into their diets, and they're going to be moving in the right direction with more food to work with. And left to their own devices, chances are they would have actually went lower. So in the grand scheme of things, the support and guidance that you're giving them is a net positive. That's how I would approach troubleshooting scenario number 1. Now let's move on to scenario number 2. In another one of these live office hours, I had a coach asking about the importance of food scales, which are used when you start to weigh out individual items of each of one of your meals, because he noticed when he started to get his clients to weigh their food, the results skyrocketed. But he's not sure if he should start recommending that to everyone. Here's what I had to say. It's important to meet each and every client where they're at. It doesn't mean that we need to treat each client entirely differently. I still am a huge proponent of flexible dieting and being prescriptive around calories and macronutrients, but how accurate someone is within those parameters is going to come down to how they want to navigate this. In most cases, someone with very basic food skills that's getting a better sense of what their food is made of, maybe they're tracking for the first time, they probably don't need to use a food scale to get the entire benefit out of more nutritional literacy and more awareness around their food choices. It doesn't need to be that accurate. Could it be helpful? Sure. Could it produce better results? Like, without a doubt. But in most cases, what we want to navigate and what we want to weigh, no pun intended, is the invasiveness of what we're getting someone to do with the actual result. And if we can get away with them just guesstimating their food choices in most cases, and maybe we can get them to use some measuring cups and spoons and be a bit more accurate on some of the food items that have higher degrees of error or higher calories to begin with, things like salad dressing and cooking oils, then that will probably be enough for them to learn more about their food, get better results, and start to do things that they can adapt to and utilize through time. For me, my philosophy around this stuff is always going to be employing a method that's not going to be so invasive that they can't keep up with it forever, while still giving them enough control so that they can get a result. And for many people, that means they don't need to use a food scale right off the bat. Now, if they start to go down this process and they're not getting results, think about scenario number 1, for example. If they're struggling, this might be one of the first things that we troubleshoot with. How accurate are you being? Is there room for us to be more accurate? Have you ever considered using a food scale? That may allow you to nail down your portion sizes and give us a better idea of what you're truly eating. And when we frame it out from the client's perspective, saying that, you will get better results if you do this, and it might be worthwhile for a period of time so you get a better sense of what your food is made of, usually they're on board. This also is going to depend on the quote unquote seriousness of the client and where they're coming from and how important the results are. For example, a competitive physique athlete is probably going to have to be dialed in to the nearest gram. They're going to want to control for those things. But a general lifestyle client that just wants to lose a few pounds, they might not need to weigh individual components of their food in order to get a result, while still tracking for things and still having control over the process, because just because it isn't perfect doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, but finding some balance and finding some middle ground. I like to tell my philosophy around this stuff, the troubleshooting method. We start to go down one course of action that we feel like it'll work. And if it doesn't work exactly the way that we thought it would, we start to get a little bit more invasive. We start to get a little bit more advanced. We ask more from our client just so that we can get it figured out. And if we don't need that, we don't do it, and everyone's happy. Hope that's helpful when it comes to food scales. Now let's move on to scenario number 3. And as promised, this one's a bit of a head scratcher. We have a case of weight loss resistance here, meaning a client is looking to lose weight and they've been at it for a period of time, but things just really aren't going their way. Last week, I had a Zoom call with a colleague. She's an amazing female coach. She helps females that are over 35, 40 years of age fall in love with lifting while getting leaner and improving their relationship with food. And she has one specific client that's been presenting her with some troubles, some frustrations. Here's a tough scenario she just couldn't crack. So here's a female client. She's in her early 30s. She's got a troubled past. tons of depression, some traumatic stress. Although she routinely sees a therapist about this and she's on antidepressant medication and it's well controlled for the most part. But she's really focused and fixated on losing that last quote unquote 10 pounds. Despite losing a considerable amount of weight in the past and even more recently, really transforming, she's stronger than ever without a lot of the injuries that applied to her in the past. She's also quite a bit fitter. She's gotten back into running and her performance is great. Visually, she looks a lot different, even in this most recent phase. She looks like a fit person, like quote unquote fit person. Could she technically lose more weight? Does she have more weight to lose? Yes, but she looks fit. But even still, she's focused on pushing the weight loss. And at the end of the day, this is her goal and not ours. So this coach, being the client-centered coach that she is, knows that her client wants to do this and they should give it a shot. They've been in a calorie deficit for the last 6 weeks, or at least an assumed calorie deficit. It was set up to do that. The client has pretty solid adherence, but they still haven't lost any scale weight. And admittedly, she's quite frustrated, and understandably. It's starting to get to her mentally a little bit, and she's becoming more and more fixated on the process. Now, here's how the conversation went with this coach, and here's some of the guidance that I gave her. Keep in mind, this client is routinely speaking with a therapist. And although some of the conversations with the coach are going to be about mindset and are going to be how the client views this experience, which aren't off limits without a doubt. But at the same time, we don't want our coaching to be therapy. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we're best suited to do. But in many cases, we can't avoid some of this stuff. But we do always want to recommend that the client see a mental health professional. Here's the first thing, though, I mentioned to this coach. This is a concept I love because it's so deeply embedded in human nature. It's something called the gap in the game. And when she was first describing this client to me, I knew right off the bat that this client was stuck in the gap, especially when it comes to her mindset. Here's how this process works. It is very common, especially someone going down this path, to be really focused on where they are right now and comparing it to where they think they should be. So where they are right now, which is a pretty fit person that's made great strides and development in their physique and their overall fitness in the last little bit, but she's still comparing it to where she thinks she should be, which is another 10 pounds down, completely lean midsection, that kind of stuff. So what she sees and all she fixates on is this distance between where she is right now and where she thinks she should be, instead of spending more time thinking about the gain, which is where she was previously and how far she's come, which is she's stronger than ever. She is performing really, really well. Fitness-wise, she's in a great place, and she's controlling for all the things that she can do to get results. And visually, she looks a lot better. When we spend a lot of time over here in the gain, we think more positively about this process, while still being constructive and thinking about the things that we can work on, though. We put more energy, positive energy, into our actions, we're more likely to believe things are going to work, and we generally get better outcomes. It's not an easy thing to navigate, but we want to continually bring up to this client how far they've gone. 90% of the job of a nutrition coach in this scenario is going to be reassuring their client that they're on the right path. Obviously, she also mentioned to the client other non-scale victories, other non-scale metrics that are improving, the way her clothes are fitting, measurements, the visual changes, while not dismissing the fact that the client wants the scale to go down. In my experience here, the number one thing you're going to need to change, which the client is already doing, is just remaining patient. She's doing all the right things. She's focusing on the right stuff. Everything seems to be in line. But at the same time, if she remains patient and continues to do these things, she will see those payoffs. A lot of times, the scale is just going to be behind some of those other changes, and chances are with the right actions, it's going to drop, and it's going to be a bigger drop. Never a bad idea to bring up old progress photos and compare them to the now so she can start to see these changes. And getting her to see, and not just telling her, is an important distinction, getting her to see that these changes are happening. And if she continues to believe that things will improve and move in the right direction, they will. The last thing that's a bit more tactical that I have experienced in the past is that with some clients, they do a really good job of working up their food calories, especially maybe in a maintenance phase or they're in a muscle gain phase, and they can move their calories up to a certain limit without really gaining too much unwanted weight. And when you start to make these reductions in calories, despite, now being in a more of a calorie deficit, their body weight doesn't really come down. It resists that change. Despite there being a big difference between what they were eating before and what they're eating now, and they go through it through time and that type of thing. I've seen this in a few scenarios with female clients that are on antidepressant medication. We tell them to go cold turkey on that. Absolutely not. That's not our place. But what we can suggest that they do is have a conversation with their GP about it, have a conversation with their family doctor, whoever is prescribing that medication around it. What that would probably look like is something like this. Hey, I know how important this goal is for you. One thing that I was thinking, and we haven't really addressed yet, is maybe the impact of some of your medication choices on this process. Now, everything's really well controlled, and I don't think that you should get off it, and that's not what I'm saying at all, but it might be worth a conversation with your doctor to see if there's any alternative medications that have really similar impacts that may not influence this process as much. That might be worth a conversation with them, and maybe they can make some adjustments that may be more conducive to your goals. In my experience, when we approach these situations with empathy, when we get our clients to start to see how far they've come and how much positive results and change and habits and everything they built into the process, things start to move in the right direction, as well as some collaborative conversations with other members of their healthcare team might get you to uncover things that you typically wouldn't and get them moving in the right direction. Those are 3 tough client scenarios. Hopefully you got the words to be able to navigate some of these situations. If you yourself have any difficult scenarios and you want me to go over them, make sure to drop them in the comments below. Feature them in the next video. Now, as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'm gonna have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. I've had many clients do really well on a ketogenic diet, but afterwards, they really don't know how to navigate adding more carbs back in. I have a video you need to see. If you have anyone in this situation or you yourself are in this situation, you can check it out right here for more details. And I'll see you in the next video.